Hey, good afternoon. Thanks for joining me. I wanted to share some insights regarding a recent MAP exercise we conducted there at Operations Group Wolf. The main intent is to review the mini campaign, a series of 3 battles conducted through MAP exercises at Operations Group Wolf I hosted for my fellow soldiers. Primary audience for this report, presentation, whatever, is practitioners of warfighting and defense due to the lingo and resources that I'll be covering. General overview, big hand wave. I'll talk about the training purpose and the audience, the campaign structure, the MAP exercise process, and then we'll cover orders, scenario generation, troop leading procedures, turns, adjudication, after action review, observer coach trainer, OCT review, and then kind of reflection on the whole exercise. Training purpose and audience. So the main training audience here is for the lower collective level leaders. It's to get them repetitions at the platoon, company, battalion level, and it also provides our OCTs additional practice. The whole reason why I've kind of developed these MAP exercises over the course of 3 years now is to provide repetitions. As a fellow combat leader, if you're watching, how many repetitions do you do a year? Do you get to practice all the myriad types of mission tasks that you might be asked to execute? We do attack with breach by itself. I know at the higher levels, division does what gap crossing a lot, but how often have you done a block in order to isolate for the company or for a battalion, so on and so forth? How often have you done follow and assume? Perimeter defense, area defense, we do that pretty often. Mobile defense, interdiction. Raids we do a lot of. How about relief in place? How about delay? How many reps have you done at delay? And how many repetitions do you believe that you need in order to maintain competence and then to increase the competence? At your echelon, I feel like it's at our echelon and then the one above, right? We're trying to practice and get ready so you can understand all the pieces, the higher level mission, and what your part would be, even if you're at that current echelon. I currently have determined right around a dozen, about 12 repetitions a year is about right. I don't believe it's a cliche when all the current Army leaders are talking about get your sets and reps, get your sets and reps. I believe it. We need sets and reps, especially in the Army National Guard when we have such finite time. So I believe that's a accumulation of any source, sticks, live fire, FTXs, lane training, or, big box JRTC training, whether that's at something like an XCTC, or it could be a MAP exercise, a radio rehearsal. I guess a rock drill may not count. I don't know. But stuff like, personal repetitions on your own time in the evening or early mornings or something. We're doing the duty day. But, that's one of the reasons why I've sought out the US, the UK fight clubs to find repetitions on some of the tournaments and campaigns that they host on combat mission or flashpoint campaigns. They also do command and all sorts of different methods to get leaders reps. It's awesome. But I think leaders need to find that, need to ensure that they're doing about a dozen a year. Again, though, for this one at OGW, primary audience, second lieutenant to major, staff sergeant, and master sergeant. Campaign structure. Here's a picture of an initial concept. We wanted to develop a series of 3 battles whose scenarios and task organizations, or what was left of those task organizations, would build upon and continue to the previous, from the previous battle to the next one. Guys wanted to do something, with context that they could look towards, with significant force ratios that are realistic. So I was like, okay, let's do Bakhmut in 2022. Um, as you can see here, I picked a spot between two major urban centers, one small village, uh, and really kind of started with, recon elements, whether doing zone recon, area recon, movement to contact, whatever. Then kind of transition to the deliberate attack on deliberate defense, and then go from there. Initially, we thought about rotating teams, fighters from each of the companies, like ACO, BCO, BCO, CCO, and then the OCTs would rotate too, and the White Cell myself would rotate. So everybody would kind of get a different rep. Ended up being ACO versus BCO, all three fights, which is fine. The OCTs shifted, which was good. For the first battle, just to note, we stuck with movement to contact as the evaluated mission task, and issued mission, as opposed to doing something more appropriate like area recon for reconnaissance units. That kind of allowed us a good starting point for the OCTs to go from. But after that, the OCTs had to determine from themselves what TNDO and stuff to use for coaching and evaluation. Orders. Each team received kind of a small frag order, but what was new for this MAPEX is I grounded it to a historical equivalent. So, for example, on the Blue Force side, it was found that the 114th Light Brigade Territorial Defense Brigade was in the vicinity of Bakhmut there in June 2022, trying to have it hit home a little bit better for these guys. Because what we currently use is the Odin site that has the full task organization of personnel and equipment. It's got the worldwide equipment guide for weapons familiarization and capabilities. So when we say second company, 4223 Mech Infantry Battalion, so on and so forth, they generally are pretty close in task organization to the 114th. And then, as you can see, we can customize the scenario and weapon systems however we want, right? Per what makes sense, or what type of asset enabler we want to practice with. This is a one-page order, more overlay order format from FM50. There was a corresponding COA sketch and other annexes for enemy analysis as an example for them to be able to use. But a lot of it, they just needed to generate it themselves. Then they went and conducted their TLPs. We issued the orders anywhere between 1 week and 3 weeks before the exercise. That way they had plenty of time. Now, generally, this is concurrent to all the other operations and training we had going on at OGW. So these guys had to do some specific time analysis, some hope analysis before their warlord on trying to find the good time, how much time they were going to allocate for each of the processes. This is not a full TLP design training value exercise. This is really solely focused on like mission analysis, course of action development, sub-steps, right? And even with inside that, there's an emphasis on enemy analysis, familiarization, getting used to what Denovian forces may have and the capabilities that equipment can do. Same with even friendly forces, right? Like Master Sergeant Ashby here comes from good Lurch units, very light, right? May not have a lot of striker experience or Bradley experience. And giving them something equivalent, either an actual U.S. cab or Pertuni, Ukrainian BMP Mech Infantry Company, provides exposure to different task organizations that we might get assigned in the future, potentially, or have attached to us. We want to know how to use them. Doing the TLPs over a course of a couple weeks allows the OCTs to conduct some coaching touch points and help guide them, remind them, add their input. That way, it's not just the fighters who are getting value. Dedication and training time availability varies between person to person and team to team. Some people spend more time and dedicate more time. Some people are like, okay, this is just a secondary or third thing on the side we're doing. That's not primary focus of what I'm here for. But that's all right. I found those people still get value, especially during the exercise. As you can see here, for example, these events allow us to to give assets and enablers that they again may not be used to. Right, the Stugna ATGMs, definitely something most people aren't familiar with. Probably have never on a live range used AP mines or APAT mines. Only a few people even know what a MAPEM is or have had improved positions with overhead cover, how long it takes to build those and where to put them, right? So this gives our leaders a chance to get exposure again. Turns. After the TLPs were done and we came to the actual exercise, I'd start with a brief. One team would head on back to their area, the other team would stay, and they would give their actions. Each turn would vary based off what part of the operation we're in time and space. Right? If they're not close to each other, they can't see each other, maybe it's an hour. It could be 30 minutes, and it goes down even action by action, so it can process all the adjudication that I'll talk about here in a little bit. Each side would present their actions, their movements, formations, order of movement, their postures, direct fire control measures, weapon postures, control statuses, sectors, indirect fire missions. And then they'd also talk about what they would expect the sub element to do. In one sense, it's macro management. Hey, I want this squad, this platoon, this company to go do this task and purpose. It's also a practice in one sense, micromanagement. Okay, how would you expect them to do that? What any specified tasks and instructions you have for them on that? But we do delineate. This is kind of what I would normally say. This is for the exercise is what I'm looking for them to do. That team would leave, the other team would come, they would provide their actions. Once both teams had provided their actions, they'd leave, and I'd process and adjudicate all the moves. Once that was done, the first team came back. I would start with showing them what they saw. They saw an enemy tank platoon. It's up on their common operating picture now. They received fire. That's what they received fire, and I'd give them the BDA of how many KIA, wounded, suppressed, okay, so on and so forth. Then they again would then do their next actions. Practice value on the tactical decision making. And this would go so on and so forth until we get through. Normally, for adjudication, there's two main types, right? We'd have the forms of contact and the actual battle damage assessment from some type of direct fire, indirect fire event. I would try and log each of the events as fast as possible and then go through the adjudication using a 2 dice method, and I'll show you how that's weighted, but then we log it and then post it. Forms of contact, as you can kind of see, we get the variables and then have some chance built in there, whether that just got unlucky, the weather's not working, private's asleep, you got the best gunner in the Western Hemisphere, or what generally you would expect. The baseline is what would we normally expect in this type of situation. We want that to happen more often than not. And this type of combat results table, die probability weighting kind of works pretty well. Go through forms of contact, but then the attacks. ambushes, actual force ratio methods, and then indirect fire as well. This, talking about sources, there's a lot of formal information called the correlation of forces that the U.S. Army uses for its wargaming step as part of MDMP. That's kind of the baseline here, but then information like I've talked about. But in addition, the Dupuy Institute, with their databases from historical battles, has been very helpful. The board games, Combat results table, and other sources is how we build in the adjudication method. Once we got done, and it generally wouldn't go till an end of a battle. We generally only reach basically the decisive point, because the exercise takes 2 to 3 hours, and we could only allocate about half a day for the exercise. We'd all come back together and conduct a hot wash after action review. I, as a white cell, would kind of show the final disposition for everybody, the final battle damage assessments, and then I'd hand it over to the OCTs. They would provide their feedback and or use self-discovery questions for the firefighting teams to be able to draw conclusions and lessons out themselves, like we like to do. Then I'd hand it over to the fighters. They would provide their own self-reflection, thoughts, anything. And then white cell, excuse me, I'd provide any final thoughts and then kind of ask for feedback on the exercise structure itself then. The exercises normally occurred on a Friday at the end of the week. So the following week, the OCTs would grab their TNDOs, whatever they selected outside of the first one, and complete it. They would provide that feedback to the unit, or the fighting teams, and then they'd bring it to me and we'd talk about it. I would act like kind of a senior OCT, give them feedback from what I saw. As they're going through, evaluated all the plan, prepare, execute, and assess portions of the mission. And for us, within the OCT realm, First Army, we have a very formal certification and grading process to be OCT certified. It's called Policy Memo 13. So this kind of helps satisfy a few of those if they do well enough, those steps. And then final kind of reflection here on the MAP exercise itself. Again, I created this because it seems pretty inconsistent with people self-seeking practice. They want to rely on-the-job repetitions, or institutional provided repetitions based off finite time, whether there's just for traditional drilling soldier in the National Guard, or even full-time soldiers, like there's so many other busy taskings and other missions to do. They may not get enough practice, right? They may be trying to train their sub-elements and sub-leaders, subordinate leaders. They may not take the time themselves to practice their echelon in the next higher. That still seems to be inconsistent. But on the value side, everybody is gaining value. Generally, everybody acknowledges, talks about it, but I can even see the competence increase by being more familiar, by expanding the number of concepts they have context for to call upon when they're coaching and when they'll be in that next green tab position. On the adjudication side, unfortunately, it's still taking about 15 minutes a turn to adjudicate both sides' actions. This is way too long. I need to continue to figure out some type of automation, or add additional personnel to the white cell who can log it and do the adjudication concurrently to receiving the actions from each of the teams. And that's probably a good idea anyway, because I will not be with Ops Group Wolf forever. I've got future assignments to look to, and really probably need to start growing the next white cell, the next people who are going to design their own MAP exercises and run and host MAP exercise training for personnel. Again, this is not the only method. This is just a good method that doesn't necessarily take a lot of resources. It does take some time, right? 2 to 3 hours on execution. Whether you take an hour of TLPs or you take 20 hours of TLPs, it could allow a leader to get as deep as they want, to get familiar and think about concepts and look in doctrine and develop a good plan as deep as they want. So it can take some time, but it doesn't take 130 people, 500 people, 1,000 people to execute. So it's got some value with that as one method of how combat leaders should practice. And I really need to make sure I kind of start handing over the reins to allow them to do that, to ensure that next leaders take this as an option for them to run. All right. To wrap up, thank you. I appreciate the time to check this out. And I guess as some cool unit motto thing, I'll say, hey, this is all to protect the people. So good hunting.